Growing up in our family, I was constantly pushed to the side, and Jackson, my younger brother 26M, always complicated my life. I am 30F. Jackson is the golden kid. No matter what I did, my parents appeared to simply give him concern. I made every effort over years to get their attention, but nothing ever succeeded. Jackson could not tolerate it now that I am successful in life, operating my own company, and at last, flourishing. He tried to undermine me, but this time it backfired. I should probably start from the beginning to clearly describe exactly how horrible things were. When it was only the three of us, my parents used to pay me dotes. They appeared pleased with what I accomplished and were caring and encouraging. But Jackson's birth seemed like I vanished from the scene. Their whole focus landed on him. Jackson was their favorite. It didn't matter what I did, whether it was excelling in school, winning in sports, or participating in extracurricular activities. Nothing delighted them enough to pay attention to me. At first, I thought it was only because he was a baby and needed more care. Jackson might do nothing wrong in the meantime. Though he wasn't particularly gifted, whatever he accomplished appeared to be appreciated as though he were a prodigy. Things came to a climax on my 18th birthday. I grew up in his shadow and learned to accept being second best in my own family. My parents threw me a party, and for once I felt the day would be all about me. I miffed. The cops called us in the middle of the celebration to let us know Jackson had been caught drinking underage with several buddies. He lingered and was captured as his friends bolted off. Knowing my dad could pull some strings to get him out of jail, I subsequently understood he did it on purpose, even if at first I assumed it was an accident. And it exactly transpired. They returned him home with just a slap on the wrist, and the remainder of my celebration revolved around him. This wasn't the only time Jackson pulled something like this. I knew then that he would always find a way to take front stage. We were meant to celebrate by having a family dinner when I started my first job at 21, but who chose to say he was engaged that same evening? Jackson, in particular. Once more, his drama eclipsed my accomplishment. That evening, I had enough and went to face my brother and parents. I told them how I felt, but instead of understanding, they charged me with being theatrical and overreactive. That was the final one of straws. It's been 9 years since that evening, and I have developed a life for myself. I cut off all communication with them and haven't spoken to them since. I launched my own company, which is currently performing really nicely. I got a new vehicle and house and carried on with my life. Jackson's life has not been going that fantastic in the meantime. According to family rumors, he sought to launch his own company, but it failed, leaving him indebted. Ever since, he has been flitting between jobs, but nothing seems to hold. He seems to have been suffering with drugs and depending on our parents to cover his financial bailout. Still, none of it inspired me to get in touch with them. A few weeks ago, I covered my company's success in a local magazine. That must have been the last thing that sent Jackson over the brink. Though 6 days ago he came up at my house and damaged my car, I had no idea he even knew where I lived. Having just returned home from work, I parked my car in the driveway as I was headed out once again for a party later that evening. When I returned outside, I discovered that someone had spray-painted it brilliant red. Though hate words covered the sides of the car, what hurt most was what he scribbled on the windshield. "You don't deserve any of this." First, I was in shock. I knew not what to do. My gut feeling was to contact the cops, but then I recalled who Dad is. Retired police with connections, if I reported Jackson, knew my dad would pull strings to get him off with another warning. As we were young, same as now, I entered, checked my security cameras, and sure enough, I saw Jackson causing damage. I was not going to allow it to happen once again. Though he attempted to be covert, hiding his face primarily and sporting a sweatshirt, he was not sufficiently careful. I knew I had the upper hand when I caught a sight of him on video. Calling the police was useless, hence I opted to handle things myself. I made sure to unblock all of my family members so they could view the film and images of the damage on social media. I tagged it, "Guess who showed up at my house to remind me I don't deserve my success?" The comments started to flood in soon after Jackson texted me practically right away, requesting that the post be taken down. Declaring that it would ruin him if others saw it, he was panicked. He even volunteered to cover the damage, but I had no financial concern. When I declined to have the post taken down, he became frantic and offered to apologize individually. What I wanted was for him to publicly recognize what he had done, but I wasn't feeling it. I wanted a public apology for everyone to view. My dad contacted me next, enraged over the post. He realized that if he brought this to court, it would just prove his guilt and had no alternative but to let the post stay up. He added it was damaging his reputation as well, particularly given he had recently retired and wanted this to not sour his legacy. I turned him down when he pleaded with me to pull it down. Perhaps things would not have come to this stage if he had made Jackson answerable all those years ago. Saying they had changed and had tried to get in touch with me several times, he tried guilt-trip me, but I wasn't buying it. Not altered at all. As always, they were simply attempting to guard Jackson. That's where things stand. Jackson is in trouble. The post is still pending. For the first time, I feel like I have finally stood up to him and my parents. After my dad's call, I anticipated things to cool off, but I was mistaken. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but I'm ready to see it through. If anything, everything became more disorganized. Although my dad's retirement should have meant less worry for him, I suppose this was too near home. 2 days after my dad's call, Jackson texted me once again. The more I refused to back down, the more fierce their efforts were to have me remove the post. After I declined to have the post taken down, he had been silent for some time, but this time he was panicked rather than merely agitated. He persisted in trying to cover the damage to my automobile, but I realized it had more to do with sentiment than money. I could afford it, honestly. I had already had the automobile painted. For Jackson, though, it had nothing to do with the automobile. It concerned his ego. He begged me to halt the public humiliation. He stated he would apologize in private, but a public one. For him, that was overly much. He stated he would lose his clientele if I did not remove the article. Since he hasn't had a steady job in years, honestly, I have no clue what clients he was referring to. Most likely, whatever clients he had were related to his dubious lifestyle. But I didn't give a damn. I didn't reply to his texts when he had to own his acts and confess what he had done to front everyone. Letting him sweat it out seemed like justice in and of itself. 2 days later, nevertheless, my folks dropped by my place. After not hearing from them in years, here they were, standing on my porch as if nothing had changed. Their not coming alone threw me off surprise. I invited them in since, to be honest, I was intrigued. They brought along their attorney, my uncle, who's renowned in the family as the guy who can fix anything. I understood right away that this was more than just a casual visit. Not terrified of them or their attorney, I wanted to see how far they were ready to go to guard Jackson. They lost no time as we sat down. My dad began outlining that they were there to provide me a last chance to remove the post. If I didn't, he added, they would be obliged to sue me for defamation, alleging I had damaged Jackson's reputation and thereby my dad's as well. To further frighten me into believing they were serious, my uncle even showed me some documentation they had ready, but I was not terrified. I laughed. Really, I knew I wasn't lying since defamation lawsuits only hold true if what you said is false. I already had the video footage. I knew Jackson had wrecked my automobile. Should they bring this before court, all it would do is reveal the truth about him and most likely bring my dad's participation into front view. I told them they were free to do whatever they wanted, and if they wanted to sue, I would be ready to refute it with the truth. My dad had spent his life hiding Jackson's mistakes. That was about to change. Saying I didn't comprehend the ramifications, my dad attempted to persuade me once again. He claimed I was being obstinate and allowing my success to distort my thinking. He began to raise his voice, and I knew he was becoming enraged. That's when he slammed his fist on my coffee table and I lost it. Telling them all to go, I got up. I was not going to sit there and listen to them try to guilt-trip me into once more defending Jackson. While my dad was flaming, my uncle remained cool. Saying they had tried to contact me for years and that I had been the one neglecting them, he sought to defend all they had done in the past. They were just trying to be a family again, he said. I told him they wouldn't have treated me like I didn't matter for all those years if they had wanted to be a family. They most definitely wouldn't be trying to control me into deleting a post that told the truth, and they wouldn't let Jackson stroll all over me. Up until then, my mother had remained calm. She started to cry now. Saying that it was ruining their lives as well, she begged me to remove the post. Jackson was not alone suffering here. She said they cut off Jackson upon learning the truth, but I disagreed. Had they truly changed, they would not have come to threaten me from my house carrying a lawyer. When it became evident that I wouldn't be moving, my dad got up, grabbed a wad of cash from his wallet, dropped it on the table, and bolted out, covering for Jackson instead of asking him to own what he did. Following were my mother and uncle, who left me standing there more enraged than ever. My dad had been supporting Jackson his entire life, and now that I was speaking out for myself, he couldn't handle it. But that wasn't the end of it. I knew I had to go farther once they left. The outburst of my dad had shown me the depth of this issue. Jackson had always been a troublemaker, but my parents equally shared guilt for allowing him to get away with everything. The next day, I told my lawyer everything and phoned her. After talking about my alternatives, we agreed it was time to file a lawsuit. I wasn't just going to let this pass. It was more than just Jackson now. It was about the reality that my parents had never treated me fairly, had never defended me, and had never shielded me. Now I'm moving ahead with a restraining order against Jackson. I wasn't going to back down, and I wouldn't let them bully me into silence either. Together, my attorney and I are looking at a lawsuit as a means of revealing the truth about my family. Though I'm not sure what the future holds, I'm ready for anything. Jackson and my parents believed they could write the story. But this time they will discover I am not the same person they pushed about in my younger years. The day my parents left, I felt an odd sense of relief. I am stronger now, and I'm not afraid to fight back. I had stood up to them for the first time, free from allowing their guilt trips control. Not the scared, insecure child they had neglected for so many years. Now an adult, I lived in my own house, ran a profitable company, and made decisions on my own initiative. Though this was not over, they no longer had control over me, and I was not about to let them shape me, not by a long shot. The next morning, I visited with my attorney, and we discussed my alternatives. My dad's outburst made it abundantly evident that Jackson wasn't the only one I needed protection from. The restraining order was a given. In their own right, my parents were likewise quite dangerous. My dad had turned to slamming his fist into my furniture and throwing cash at me like I was some sort of charity case when they had come into my house and tried to bully me into compliance. My lawyer agreed that we needed to move fast. Jackson had already wrecked my car, and I had no time to wait for my dad or him to act worse. That same day, we turned in the paperwork for the restraining order. I also advised my attorney of the defamation lawsuit my parents had threatened me with. Neither was I, nor was he worried about it. The real question now was whether to proceed. As I had already told my parents, defamation lawsuits fall short if the claims are true, and I had the video evidence to prove everything. My attorney advised us to give damages lawsuits against Jackson and my parents some thought. It changed from simply the car now. It was about the years of emotional abuse, the neglect, the favoritism, and the reality that Jackson's behavior had been encouraged for as long as I could remember. Part of me was hesitant. Taking legal action against my own family felt extreme. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was necessary. My parents had always swept Jackson's behavior under the rug, and that had allowed him to get away with everything. From ruining my birthday parties to vandalizing my property, he had never faced any real consequences. My parents had always bailed him out, protected him, and made excuses for him, but not this time. If they thought they could intimidate me into silence, they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them keep enabling Jackson's destructive behavior, especially not when it was affecting me directly. My lawyer and I decided to move forward with the lawsuit. It would be a way to hold them accountable, not just for what had happened with the car, but for everything they had done to me over the years. In the meantime, I had to deal with the fallout from the post. It had been up for over a week now, and the reactions from family and friends were intense. My parents had tried to do damage control, but it wasn't working. Everyone had seen the video, and they knew that I wasn't lying. People I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out to me, offering their support and telling me that they had always suspected something was off with my family. Jackson, on the other hand, had gone completely silent. I hadn't heard from him since his last desperate text, and I assumed he was just waiting for this whole thing to blow over. But that wasn't going to happen. My post wasn't going anywhere, and until he gave me a public apology, it would stay up for the world to see. I knew that Jackson's silence didn't mean he had given up, though. He was probably plotting his next move, and I needed to stay ahead of him. My lawyer had warned me that Jackson might try to retaliate in some way, either through legal channels or something more underhanded. He wasn't the type to just accept defeat, especially when it came to his image. He had always been obsessed with looking like the golden child, and my post had shattered that illusion. That's when I got an unexpected call from one of my old school friends. They told me something that put everything into perspective. Apparently, Jackson had been dealing drugs for years. Not just small-time stuff, but hard drugs, and he had built a pretty solid network of clients. Rich, upper-class types who didn't want to get their hands dirty. That's where his money was coming from. It all made sense now. His lavish lifestyle, despite not having a stable job, the parties, the random sources of income. Jackson had been living a double life, and my parents were either clueless or willfully ignorant. Suddenly, the stakes were much higher. This wasn't just about a vandalized car anymore. If Jackson's drug dealing came to light, it wouldn't just destroy his reputation. It could land him in serious legal trouble. And my dad, who had spent his entire career as a cop, would be dragged down with him for covering it up. I wasn't sure if my parents knew the full extent of Jackson's activities, but I was starting to suspect that they did. And if that was the case, then they weren't just protecting him, they were actively complicit. I had to be careful. As much as I wanted to expose Jackson for everything he had done, I needed to play this smart. If I moved too fast, my dad could use his connections to bury the case before it even started. But if I waited too long, Jackson might retaliate in a way that could harm me or my business. For now, I focused on the restraining order and the lawsuit. My lawyer assured me that we were on solid ground, and I trusted him. I wasn't backing down. This time, my family would face the consequences of their actions, and Jackson would finally have to take responsibility for the mess he had created. As for my parents, I wasn't sure what their next move would be. They had tried to threaten me with legal action, but that had failed. Now, they were probably scrambling to figure out how to protect Jackson without getting themselves into deeper trouble. But it was too late for that. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The silence from Jackson and my parents was unsettling, but I wasn't going to let it intimidate me. I had spent too many years living in their shadow, being treated like I didn't matter. Now I was finally standing up for myself, and it felt good. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready for it. This wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming my life. I had built everything I had from the ground up without any help from my family, and I wasn't about to let them tear it down. Not this time. The legal proceedings moved faster than I expected, and within a few weeks we were scheduled for the first court appearance regarding the restraining order. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I felt a sense of closure creeping in. After years of being sidelined, overlooked, and disregarded by my family, I was finally taking a stand, and I had a solid case to back me up. The day of the court appearance arrived, and as I walked into the courtroom, I spotted Jackson and my parents sitting together. They didn't look happy to see me. My mom had a strained expression, and my dad avoided making eye contact altogether. Jackson, however, was seething. I could practically feel his anger from across the room, but I wasn't intimidated. I had come too far to back down now. When the hearing started, my lawyer presented the evidence of Jackson's vandalism, the video, the photos, and the online confession from Jackson's texts. It was undeniable proof of what he had done. My parents, of course, tried to paint a different picture. Their lawyer argued that I had overreacted, that it was a harmless prank blown out of proportion, and that by posting the video online, I had damaged their reputation. I had to suppress a laugh. A harmless prank? My brother spray-painted my car with profanity and hateful words, and they were calling it a prank? That was the kind of delusional thinking I had dealt with my entire life. Jackson could do no wrong in their eyes, even when the evidence was right in front of them. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I told the court everything about how Jackson had tormented me for years, how my parents had enabled his behavior, and how I had been cut off emotionally and financially for most of my life. I explained that the vandalism was just the latest in a long line of incidents, and I was done being the scapegoat for their dysfunctional family dynamics. As I spoke, I could see my mom's eyes welling up with tears, but I wasn't moved. Her tears didn't change the fact that she and my dad had allowed Jackson to bully me for years. My dad still wouldn't look at me, his face flushed with embarrassment or anger. I couldn't tell which. Jackson sat there with his jaw clenched, refusing to meet my gaze. When I finished, my lawyer requested that the restraining order be granted. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, sided with us. Jackson was ordered to stay away from me and my property for a year, with the possibility of an extension if necessary. It wasn't the outcome my parents had been hoping for, but it was a huge win for me. I finally had the legal protection I needed. But the court case wasn't the end of it. As soon as we left the courtroom, I was bombarded with calls and texts from my parents. My dad, in particular, was furious. He accused me of ruining their lives and of tarnishing their reputation in the community. He said that his friends on the force were asking questions and that he was being shunned because of the bad press surrounding Jackson's actions. Apparently, even though my dad had retired, the story had spread and his colleagues didn't look at him the same way anymore. My post had done more damage than I had even anticipated. Jackson, meanwhile, continued his campaign of denial. Even after the restraining order was issued, he started posting cryptic messages on social media, accusing me of being a liar and a manipulator. He played the victim card hard, trying to convince anyone who would listen that I was the problem, not him. But it didn't work. People had seen the video. They knew the truth. He had no one left in his corner except my parents, and even they were starting to crack under the pressure. Things reached a boiling point a week after the court case. I was at home, relaxing after a long day of work, when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the security cameras before answering. To my surprise, it was my mom, standing alone on the porch, looking defeated. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small and shaky. I crossed my arms, not ready to let my guard down. "About what?" She stepped inside, wringing her hands nervously. "About everything." We sat down in the living room, and for the first time in years, my mom opened up to me. She admitted that she and my dad had been wrong to favor Jackson all these years and that they had failed me as parents. She said that they had always known Jackson had problems, but they didn't know how to deal with it, so they just kept enabling him. She also admitted that they knew about his involvement in drugs and shady dealings, but they had been too afraid to confront him, too afraid of what would happen if they cut him off completely. "I don't expect you to forgive us," she said, her eyes filled with regret, "but I want you to know that we're sorry. We know we failed you. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her to tell her that it was too little, too late, but another part of me felt a strange sense of relief. Hearing her admit the truth, after all these years of denial, was more than I had ever expected. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally said, my voice calm but firm. "But it doesn't change what's happened. Jackson has made his choices, and so have you and Dad. I can't just forget about everything." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of everything hanging in the air. Finally, she stood up and headed for the door. "If you ever want to talk again, I'm here," she said softly. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to let her back into my life, not yet, maybe not ever. But at least now, I had some closure. As she left, I realized that this was the first time in years that I had felt truly free. Free from the weight of my family's expectations, free from the burden of trying to win their approval. I had built my life on my own terms, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their toxic cycle. The next day, I received a text from Jackson. It was short and to the point. "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether or not to respond. In the end, I didn't. His apology wasn't enough. Not after everything he had done. He had to live with the consequences of his actions, just like I had lived with the consequences of theirs. As I closed the text, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This chapter of my life was finally over. My family might never be whole again, but I didn't need them to be. I had found my own way, my own success, and I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Story 2. Dad turned and walked away. He gets in touch years later. However, what he truly desires is astonishing. I'm now 17, but when I was 7 years old, my father abruptly departed without giving me any notice. He was here one day and gone the next. My sister Emma and I remember my mother attempting to clarify it to us. However, how would you explain it to children? Honestly, she had no genuine response either. All she knew was that their relationship was having some problems with him. They must have been fighting a lot at the time because they simply disappeared. The element that has always concerned me is that he said nothing, not even a farewell, simply vanished for an extended period. Mom found it hard to accept that it was ended. She would say things like, perhaps he just needs more time to process the situation, or perhaps he will return once he understands what he is missing. I think she genuinely believed it for a time. Before deciding to file for divorce, she waited a whole 5 years. 5 years? It's unfathomable to have to wait so long for someone who wasn't kind enough to bid farewell. However, that's the issue. He was still with her. Though he wasn't physically present, it seemed to me that he had never left. Emma was smitten with him, and Mom was too. My sister Emma was 12 when he departed. She is now 22. She had a far better memory of him than I did. She would not stop talking about him, asking her mother if she believed he would return. Emma could have believed that if she let go of the hope, it would be the equivalent of his saying he didn't care about us. But I'm not going to lie, he's not really that memorable to me. Well, there are a few things that I can vaguely recall. It's all hazy, but he used to tell me bedtime tales and things like that. It, peculiar. Correct? How in the world do you forget someone who should be your father? However, it is what occurs when someone isn't around for a very long time. They sort of vanish. It remains unnoticed until you find yourself unable to visualize their face one day. Simply blank. Nevertheless, fast forward to last week when my dad unexpectedly texted my mom. Yes. He chooses to text her as if it's no big thing even after all these years. Hey, let's catch up. I know I've been gone for like 10 years. When Mom informed us she was seated at the kitchen table with this strange expression on her face, I assumed something horrible had happened. I couldn't believe it. Like perhaps she had a job loss or something. No, that was him. He's keen to get together. Glancing between Emma and myself, she said, he's hoping to see us. Emma became excited right away. By the way her face lit up, I knew. She was immediately talking about how excited she was to see him again and how she always knew he would return. I sat there feeling a little numb. I was genuinely unsure of how to respond. It wasn't as though I had been waiting for him to arrive. I had moved on. I felt like I had, however. Mom inquired as to our want to attend. That didn't surprise Emma at all, but I was hesitant. To be honest, I didn't really want to see him. What was the purpose? It wasn't like something would miraculously get better just by looking at him. He departed from us. He made the decision to go and never turn around. So why should I give it any thought? However, my thoughts turned to Mom and Emma. I did not want to be the one to let them down. It's clear that they want this. I reasoned that even if it was only for them, I could just get over it and go. Thus, we made plans to meet him at a local diner. Very informal, nothing elaborate. I didn't even make an effort to get dressed or anything. Sincerely, I couldn't care less about how I looked, so I just threw on a sweatshirt and trousers. Impressing him was not important to me. Emma was a nervous wreck on the day of the meeting. She kept adjusting her hair and checking to see whether she looked all right. Mom was a little silent, as if she were unsure of how to feel about anything. I was just, not sure. The best word to put it is numb. I felt nothing at all. I wasn't nervous or thrilled. We arrived early at the diner and took a booth in the corner. Emma continued to stare at the door as if she were counting down the minutes till he arrived. Mom was fumbling with her napkin, constantly folding and unfolding it. I tried not to worry too much about what was going to happen as I simply glanced out the window. And then he entered. It felt strange to see him once more. It was evident that he seemed older, yet it was still him. Same eyes and face. I briefly considered experiencing some sort of emotional surge or other such sensation. However, nope, nothing. Similar, like meeting a stranger. Emma and Mom started crying right away. They got up and gave him hugs as though he had only been gone for a week rather than 10. He gave them a hug in return, and I noticed that he was crying as well. He then turned to face me. I remained sitting, unsure of what action to take. With a smile on his face, as if we were longtime acquaintances, he approached and took a seat opposite me. He said, "I've missed you so much, Katie." I looked at him blankly. How was I meant to respond to that? I couldn't recall him. I didn't feel his absence. I had the impression that he was speaking to someone else. "Do you not miss your father?" Looking a bit wounded, he asked. I simply blurted it out at that point. "To be honest, I have no memory of you, Dot." His expression fell. It seemed as though he was at a loss for words. He probably thought I would run into his arms or something, similar to what you see in movies. However, it was not going to occur. I was 7 when he left. I had moved on from knowing him. The remainder of the meeting was quite uncomfortable. He persisted in trying to strike up a discussion, but it was obvious that my words had disturbed him. I didn't intend to be cruel. I was only speaking the truth. However, I suppose that people don't always want to hear the truth. He finally declared that he had to go, pretending to have a job or whatever. I rejected it. All he wanted was to get out of there. Honestly, I didn't give a damn. Neither did I want to be there. When he departed, I figured that would be the end of it, but oh no. As soon as we came home, Mom and Emma turned on me. "How could you tell him that? Mom lost her temper. How much this meant to your sister, do you know?" Emma was clearly angry, even though she didn't say anything. I suppose I destroyed the moment for her, as she had been waiting so long for it. But what did they anticipate from me? Act as though nothing happened, as if he hadn't given up on us. So things quickly took a turn when we returned from seeing Dad at the diner. I had the hope that my mother and Emma would be able to relate to me. I didn't see the sense in acting like everything was well, even though I wasn't trying to be impolite or anything. It wasn't good. Or at least not for me, but as soon as we came through the door, they turned on me rather than seeing it my way. Before my mother entered the home, I hadn't even arrived completely. She pivoted and gazed at me as though I had committed an unpardonable act. "Katie, how could you tell him that?" With a tight voice, as if she were trying to contain her scream, she snapped, "What that happened to him or your sister, do you know?" I was at a loss for words and just stood there. I wanted to apologize in part. However, the other aspect, the majority didn't. Why should I apologize for being honest? I didn't want to offend anyone, but I also wasn't going to act as though I hadn't missed him for all these years. He has vanished. That was all there was to it. It was made worse, somehow, by Emma's silence. Normally, she wasn't the shy sort. Although I didn't think I had done anything wrong, I felt bad to see her sitting there on the couch, all silent and dejected. Nothing that I said wasn't true. Eventually, I said, speaking softer than I had wished, "I have no memory of him. I'm not to blame for it." Mom only gave a head shake, as if what she was hearing was beyond belief. "You could have at least tried, Katie. Emma has been waiting years for this, and now you simply... It was damaged by you. You damaged it, and he returned." That final sentence hurt. I had no intention of ruining anything. Actually, I went to that dumb eatery on their behalf. Not in my opinion. But they were portraying me as the antagonist, as if I had purposefully screwed everything up. Emma continued to remain silent, which only increased my frustration. Despite her obvious distress, she remained silent and simply gazed at the ground as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. I was aware of her disappointment. Since he reached out, she had been talking about Dad constantly, expressing how much she missed him, and how this was the opportunity we had been waiting for. I wasn't waiting for him, though, unlike how she was. It had been a while since I'd come to terms with his departure. Nothing got ruined by me. This time I spoke a little more strongly. I was not even inclined to go. But I also completed it for you. I apologize, but I won't tell lies. I have no memory of him. That is the actuality. As I just mentioned, Mom raised her hands in the air. "The most absurd thing, Katie, you didn't even try. You pretended to be indifferent while you sat there, as if none of this was important. You then admitted to him that you couldn't remember him. How did you think?" I was wondering how I had forgotten about him. I fired back. "Mom, what are you wanting me to say? Would you like me to act as though I have been missing him for the entire time? Since I haven't?" Emma eventually said something at that point, and her voice was so little and so faint that it took me a moment to realize she was even speaking. It quotes what I've been waiting for. Without glancing at me, she spoke. I've been waiting for him to return for years, Katie. You just as well. You were simply indifferent. I exhaled. I had the impression that I was trapped in an impossibility. I was at a loss for words to convey my feelings to them without coming out as a total jerk. Not that I don't give a damn. I made an effort to clarify. It's only, for me, it's different. Emma, do you recall him? Not in my case. He is no longer my father, not really. When she finally looked up at me, she continued, but he's your dad. She was weeping so hard that her crimson eyes showed how much this was affecting her. Katie, he's our father, and you're acting as like he doesn't even exist now that he's back. He departed. I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone. Emma, he left us. For a decade, he showed no concern for us, and now he wishes to return as if nothing had occurred. I apologize, but I can't let it go. Mom seems to be itching to get involved once more. Emma, however, got up before she could and walked by me to her room. She simply left the room without saying anything more, and the sound of her bedroom door shutting behind her seemed louder than it was. I stood there simultaneously feeling uncomfortable, guilty, and irritated. I was at a loss for words to improve the situation. Furthermore, I wasn't entirely certain that I wanted to improve things. I didn't do this. His leaving wasn't my fault, and I had nothing to do with their inability to recognize that. Naturally, Mom wasn't finished. You have to repair this, Katie, she whispered, turning to face me with fierce eyes. You should apologize to your father for what you said in a conversation. Unbelieving by what I was hearing, I blinked. Offer an apology. For what purpose? For being honest, for having a self-centered attitude. She lost her temper. Katie, it wasn't all about you. This concerned your family and your sister, and because you were unable to swallow your pride, you wrecked it. And that was all. I had finished. Vanity. Right now, are you serious? Nothing got ruined by me. It was him, not me, who departed. You now anticipate that I will what precisely? Open your arms and welcome him back. No, that isn't taking place. Mom shook her head once again and remarked, You're acting like a child. You must mature and quit making this about yourself. I laughed, but not in a good way. It was the type of chuckle you get when you realize how absurd life has become. It's me who is behaving like a child. Really, it's him who vanished from sight for a decade. It's me who needs to mature as well. Mom remained silent. She glared at me as if I were the worst letdown ever and simply stood there. I stood in the center of the living room for a few seconds, feeling like I was the only one who could see things clearly until she turned around and left. I didn't weep or scream, or maybe both, but I didn't do any of those things. I only remained there, gazing at the location where my mother had been, perplexed as to how things had gone so out of control. Nothing got ruined by me. Although I was aware of this, I was nonetheless held responsible for everything. It wasn't equitable. What else, though, was new? Thus, following the entire meltdown involving me, Mom, and Emma, things at home were rather awkward. As if no one was conversing with one another, and the moments they spent together were either tense or brief. Sincerely, I thought maybe after a few days they would cease being upset with me for not acting like they were overjoyed about my father's return. However, I was mistaken. It was becoming to be rather annoying how long this strange stillness was lasting. After that, my mother sat Emma and I down at the kitchen table a few days later. She was wearing the same serious mom expression from when we were kids, and I could tell something was wrong since we were in trouble. I was waiting for her to say anything, and I was just sitting there. I knew this was going to be another lecture about how I wrecked everything, so I tried not to roll my eyes. However, it wasn't. Your father? He is ill. Glancing mostly at me, but at both of us, she said. Despite her calm demeanor, I could tell she was worried by the way her hands were grasping the table's edge. Emma said, What do you mean sick? As soon as her eyes widened. I mean, how awful is it? Mom inhaled deeply. When I realized that this wasn't your average cold or something. She said that his kidneys are failing. He has been receiving dialysis for some time, but it is insufficient. A transplant is necessary for him. I blinked as I tried to take in what she had said. The room was growing smaller, and I could feel my gut tightening. That's what it was all about. Then the reason Dad returned. Not that he didn't miss us, not to make up for all the years he withheld from us. No, he returned because he was in need of something. I was required by him. Before I could even process the entire question, Emma had already asked half of it. Can we assist him? Are there any actions we can take? Mom gave me another look as she nodded. Emma was put to the test already. Her voice was hushed, as if she was frightened to speak it aloud. She isn't a match, though. My heart began to sink. What came next was previously known to me. I didn't want to hear it, even though I knew where this was headed. I had no desire to participate in this. Do you also want me to take a test? I inquired, even if I was aware of the solution beforehand. Mom gave another nod. Indeed, Katie, there's a chance you may be a fit. We must be aware of this. Emma turned to face me, hope shining in her eyes. You could save him if you're a match. Dad might be saved by you. And then it dawned on me, that was the main motivation for getting back together, in the background of everything. He missed us, which is why he didn't return. Perhaps as a result of his newfound concern for fatherhood. He returned because he was in need of a kidney. And now it was my turn to make everything right. I remained silent for quite some time. I was unable to. My mind was racing in circles as I tried to process my feelings over everything. I recognized, on the one hand, that it was neither my mother's nor mine. I knew they were as engrossed in this as I was, and they truly wanted their dad back. However, I also couldn't get rid of the sensation that I was being exploited, as if I were a backup plan for a person who abandoned us when we most needed him. Do you think I'll just give my kidney to him? In the end, I asked, even if my voice sounded empty. He turned away from us. Mom. For years, he showed no concern for us. And that's why he's back now. He needs something. And you're expecting me to just comply? Before Mom could say anything, Emma stepped in. Katie, he remains our father. I understand your anger at him, but this is severe. He might be saved if you are a match. I stared at her, unable to understand how she could dismiss everything with such ease, as if the last 10 years never occurred, like his leaving us wasn't enough to leave unhealed wounds. But why ought I to? I inquired to myself, more so than to them. Given that he gave us nothing, why should I offer him anything? Mom sighed, and for an instant I believed that she may be beginning to see my perspective. Naturally, though, it did not occur. Leaning forward, she tried to appear sympathetic as she replied, I know it's hard. You have every right to be furious, and I understand that, but this is no longer about the past. This pertains to the life of your father. You ought to assist him if you are able to. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. Ought to. I repeated myself, feeling a wave of rage rising. I ought to assist him. Why, since he is my dad? As soon as he left us, he forfeited that privilege. Mom, I shouldn't have given him this. I could see Emma wanted to say something, even though it seemed like she was about to cry, but I stopped caring. I was overplaying the villain. When all I was doing was expressing the truth, I was sick of them acting as though I was the issue. I resisted Mom's attempt to put her hand on mine. Please, Katie. With a sweet voice, she spoke. Simply consider it. All I'm asking for is that. Simply take a test. As of yet, we are unsure if you are even a match. With my chair making a loud scrape across the floor, I got up. No, I stated strongly. I refuse to do it. I'm not giving him my kidney, and I'm not going to be tested. Emma scowled at me as though I had just given her a smack. Please, Katie. In a whisper, she said, he is our father. I gave a head shake. He was your dad, not mine, Emma, so no. He was no longer mine long ago. My heart thumping in my chest, I turned and left the kitchen after that. Even though I could hear them yelling after me, I continued on. I was unable to. I needed time alone to reflect and come up with a plan for handling everything. I knew nothing about him. He was unknown to me, my time, my kidney, or my forgiveness. However, the pain persisted. Emma's distress was evident as the optimism in her eyes vanished due to my actions. But I was unable to succeed. I could not simply give up. Additionally, I was acting in my own best interests, as far as I knew. I couldn't help but worry if I would ever get over my guilt over it. Things got a whole lot worse at home after that kitchen quarrel. It seemed like I was walking through a minefield every day, if I could call it that previously. I couldn't hear Mom talking at all. Nothing, really. She would deliberately avoid me like if I didn't exist. She only gave me curt, succinct replies, like yes or no, if she had to talk to me at all, dot. That was painful. I will not be dishonest. The silence treatment from your own mother was what I was anticipating, not an embrace or anything. Yes, Emma finds that irritating. She didn't let up. She would not cease pleading with me to reconsider, to consider my father's final days. I would say the same thing to her each time she turned on. I refused to take part in it. It didn't matter that I wasn't going to be tested. A few hours later, she would return and try again, as if she believed that if she persisted long enough, I would eventually give in. I was getting tired of it. I'll tell it how it is. It's not like I was having fun with the whole thing. Observing my sister's distress, observing my mother behave as if I were a monster, dot. It was awful. That being said, I wasn't comfortable with him. It didn't feel right to me that his return was just motivated by a desire for anything. It made me wonder, what happens when he gets his wish fulfilled? Does he vanish once more, returning to his hiding place of the previous 10 years? Is it expected of me to just disregard that? After Emma begged me one more time one evening, I lost my cool. "Why are you so adamant about this?" I asked, speaking louder than I intended to. "Why are you the one portraying him as this heroic figure that we must save? Emma, he left us. He was indifferent to us for 10 years, and now he's back because he needs a kidney, dot. Are you comfortable with that?" Emma turned to face me, and once more I could see tears forming in her eyes. "He's still our dad, Katie, and as much as I hated to bring her to tears, I had to get this out." Her voice faltered as she said, "I am aware that he departed, even if he wounded us, our father nonetheless. He is ill, dot. And why wouldn't you? If you could assist him?" I raised my hands in exasperation. "Since it's not that easy. I owe him nothing at all. His illness does not absolve him of anything he done to us." Sniffing, Emma dabbed at her eyes. "But you want to be the greater person, don't you? Would you not like to give him another go?" That pricked a nerve, dot. "Why is my responsibility to constantly be the stronger person?" I fired back. "Why must I be the one to forget and provide forgiveness? Emma, what about him? How has he addressed this to put it right?" She had no response for that. She only shook her head and turned to go, murmuring something about how self-centered I was, dot, and it was always like that. Our conversations always ended the same way. Emma was staring at me as if I were the worst person alive, and me attempting to explain why I couldn't pull it off. With Mom, things didn't get much better either. One day I heard her chatting to one of her friends on the phone and expressing how disappointed she was with me. Katie is colder than I could have imagined. She spoke as though I wasn't listening to every word from the next room. How could she have abandoned her own father in such a way? I was itching to yell. I wanted to storm right in and question her about this unexpected fatherly devotion. When he left us, where was this? Where had this been during the night when she was sobbing herself to sleep and questioning why he didn't care enough to stay? But I remained silent. I simply returned to my room and made an effort to ignore everything. The most detrimental aspect? The shame. No matter how strongly I held my ground, I could never shake the small voice in the back of my mind that made me wonder if I was acting morally, dot. But what if Mom and Emma were correct? Maybe I was being self-centered. What if I was seriously going wrong? No matter how hard I worked, it felt like there was always a weight on my shoulders that I was unable to remove. I read a lot of articles and tales regarding organ donation on my phone one night when I was having trouble falling asleep, dot. There were countless accounts of people claiming that saving the lives of their loved ones was the finest choice they had ever made. As I read them, I could feel the pressure mounting, as if I was meant to be inspired, to suddenly have a change of heart, and to go out and be tested. However, I was unable to see myself performing it each time I attempted. Nothing felt quite right. It was not an issue of self-interest. It was about being aware of my position, being aware of what I could provide and what I was unwilling to give, not with him. Emma gave it another go in the morning. With her coffee in hand, she sat at the kitchen table next to me, gazing at me through her melancholic eyes. She said, "I know you're terrified, Katie. I am aware that this is a lot to ask, but you must comprehend. This is his existence. This pertains to the life of our father." I rubbed my temples and set down my spoon within. "Emma, I'm not frightened. I'm upset. I'm upset that he believes he can simply walk up and make this kind of request. It's unfair, given everything he's done, Dot. She extended her hand to take hold of mine. I genuinely do understand. It's not always about what's fair, though. Occasionally, doing the right thing is important. Shaking my head, I withdrew my hand. No. Speaking out for oneself is also a part of doing what is right. I will not allow him to take advantage of me in this way. I refuse to take any tests. Dot. That concludes things. With a defeated expression on her face, she cast her gaze down at her coffee. I just did. She said, I don't want to lose him again. Her comments lingered in the air, leaving me momentarily at a loss for words. I was aware that she was missing him. She wanted her dad back. I understood it. The problem was that she could no longer find the father she desired. Dot. The day he departed from us. He was gone, and nothing could bring him back. I whispered to Emma, I'm sorry. However, I'm not able to. After that, she said nothing more. She just sat there, staring at her coffee, and with every second that went by, I could feel the gap between us getting more. Everything in the home gradually grew quieter after that final talk with Emma. Dot. But not the type of stillness that's peaceful. It resembled this dense quietness more, as if they were all waiting for the next explosion to occur and were cautious around one another. Although Emma had stopped weeping, Mom continued to give me the cold shoulder, and her sad, disappointed expression stung far more than if she had just shouted at me. I had the constant sensation of having this enormous weight on my chest as I went about my business. My comfort level in my own home has decreased. I wouldn't spend too much time in the same room with them. I usually confine myself to my bedroom or go outside to get some fresh air. I felt uncomfortable even simply sitting in the living room, like if I didn't belong there. Dot. And then one evening, everything came to a head. I was in my room doing my own business when I heard my mother's voice below. It was late, maybe about 9 o'clock. She wasn't bothering to lower her voice when she was on the phone. Even though I was only able to hear fragments of what she was saying, it made my stomach turn. Things like, she's not the same kid I raised, and I don't know what's wrong with her. I made an attempt to block it out, but I couldn't. Her words were like a knife to the gut, every one of them. Her tone carried more than simply disappointment. It was annoyance. It seemed as though she was truly upset with me for not fulfilling her requests. Dot. And it truly dawned on me for the first time just how far this whole thing had gone. It was more than a quarrel now. They were really, really angry with me, and I wasn't sure whether we would ever be able to make things right. I waited in my room for the phone call to conclude, but things continued to become worse. After 10 or so minutes, I heard my mother calling out to me from the downstairs. Katie, could you just stop by for a moment? I became motionless. This gave me a horrible feeling. Her voice made me hesitate, but normally I would have just gone down and dealt with it. She didn't sound crazy, but she also didn't sound typical. Her tone was strange. It sounded like she was trying to be cool, but was having trouble staying composed. I struggled downstairs, attempting to prepare myself for the impending event. Mom was seated at the table when I arrived in the kitchen, her phone resting on the nearby counter. It was strange that Emma wasn't present because she typically supported Mom in these types of conversations. It was just the two of us. Katie. She motioned to the chair across from her and said, "Sit down." I sat down and felt my palms start to perspire. This was not going to end well, I knew that. Mom inhaled deeply before beginning. I've been considering all that has been going on a lot. With a quiet yet serious voice, she started, "And there's something I need you to comprehend. The circumstance involving your father. It extends beyond you." I gave a nod but said nothing. I wasn't confident enough to speak yet. "It goes beyond how you feel," she went on. "I am aware of your pain. Although I understand your anger, this goes beyond that. Katie, your dad is dying. He doesn't have time for grudges." Her words hit me like a brick. It was the first time she had said it so plainly. Dying. There it was, laid out in front of me with no sugarcoating. And as much as I had tried to keep my guard up, those words made me flinch. "I get that you're upset," Mom went on, her eyes locked on mine. "I get that, but we can't afford to be selfish right now. We can't afford to hold on to the past when someone's life is at stake. Your sister and I, We're doing everything we can to make this right, and we need you to be a part of that. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands clenching into fists on my lap. I'm not being selfish, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I can't do this, Mom. I can't be the one to fix everything. Mom sighed, rubbing her temples like she was trying to keep calm. This isn't about fixing everything, Katie. It's about giving him a chance, giving us all a chance. Your sister's been through hell with this, and so have I. We've lost so much time already, and now we're running out of it. I swallowed hard, trying to fight back the frustration that was building up again. Why is it always on me, though? I asked, my voice wavering a little. Why do I have to be the one to do this? I never requested any of this. I know, Mom responded, and for a second, I saw something soften in her countenance. I know you didn't ask for this, but sometimes we don't get to choose what we're asked to do. Sometimes life simply happens, and right now you have the ability to save him. I shook my head. Tears started to spring up in my eyes. But he didn't care about us for years. Mom, why does that not matter to you? Why doesn't it matter that he walked away and left us to pick up the pieces? It does matter, she responded, her voice breaking just a bit. It matters more than you know, but clinging on to that rage won't alter anything. It won't bring back the time we lost. The only thing we can do now is go ahead. We sat there for a long moment together. Her comments weighed heavily and hung between us. I had run out of things to say. A part of me wanted to cry out that this wasn't fair and that I shouldn't have to decide this alone. However, the other part of me felt so worn out and little, as if the weight of it all was crushing me. Mom murmured gently, I need you to think about this, Katie. Give it some serious thought. It is not for you to do. Please do it for your family, your sister, and us. A tear started to trickle down my face, but I wiped it away right immediately. My desire was to avoid crying in front of her. I couldn't contain my inner turmoil any longer, even though I didn't want her to see it. I will consider it. Barely able to get the words out, I murmured. Mom got up from the table and nodded. She gave me a faint, sad grin and added, That's all I'm asking. Simply consider it. When she was gone, I sat there for a while, focusing on the vacant seat across from me. My thoughts were spinning in circles. I had no idea what to do. I wasn't sure if I had the strength to refuse requests repeatedly. However, one thing was certain. I was losing myself in this, piece by piece, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. My brain was racing after that conversation with my mother. I told her I would give it some thought, but to be really honest, I didn't want to. I had had enough of dwelling on it, weary of the burden and the guilt, the conviction that I needed to solve every problem on my own. All I wanted was for it all to end, but regardless of circumstances, it was present at all times. I was unable to avoid it. I think I was relieved when Emma stopped bothering me, but it also felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. It seemed as though the quiet was simply gathering up to await my major choice. Although Mom had stopped talking about it, I knew that she was still holding out hope that I would change. She seemed to be waiting for me to just get up one day and decide, okay, I'll do it, based on the way she would look at me. However, I didn't. I refused to allow them to shame me into doing anything, I told myself again and over. I could not ignore the weight of Dad's unexpected homecoming, but I also couldn't allow it play havoc with my mind. The conviction that this was a matter of life and death. It was more complicated than simply refusing and turning around. I felt as though every time I said no, I was getting closer to this undefined point when I would have to make a decision or give in to peer pressure, and I wasn't sure which was worse. One evening, while I lay in bed and gazed up at the ceiling, I heard someone knock on my door. Emma was the one. Glancing inside, she slightly cracked open the door. Her face was still swollen from all the recent sobbing. "Is it okay for me to enter?" Her voice was soft as she asked. She crept into the room and perched on the side of my bed, and I nodded and sat up. She remained silent for some time, and I didn't press her to speak. She was clearly in pain, and to some extent, I suppose I was too. I admit that I was harsh with you. When she did speak, her voice cracked a bit. I simply don't know how to handle it. I have no idea how I'll lose him again. Her remark struck a chord with me, but I was at a loss for words. Emma was someone I didn't want to lose. I detested seeing her in this state, torn between realizing how much our father had harmed us and wanting to protect him. I'm terrified. With my own words, I confessed, calm. If I go ahead with this, I fear that I will regret it. I will also regret it if I don't. Emma wiped her tears and nodded. I understand. Yes, I do. I just feel like it's unfair that you have to choose this. I want you to know that no matter what you choose, you won't make me dislike you. I am unable to. Her comments brought me relief for the first time in what seemed like a long time. I had nothing to respond to her. Not quite yet. But even just knowing that Emma wasn't using everything against me relieved some of my tension. I apologized in a whisper, but all she did was nod. She had fatigued and red eyes. After that, we didn't say much more. She just sat with me for a little time before leaving my room on her way out. I came to the realization that no matter what choice I made, the past would never repeat itself. There was no avoiding the fact that this would completely alter everything. I could only take each day as it came for the time being, though. Last edit. Thus, after debating for weeks and having many sleepless nights, I ultimately made the decision to take the exam. I reached a breaking point and began to consider the possibility that this was the only way to end it all. At least then we would be certain if I were tested. I told Mom and Emma, and they felt optimistic for the first time in a long time. The actual test was completed quickly. The doctor just required some blood tests and questions, but the waiting thereafter was excruciating. The three of us were cautious around each other, attempting to seem normal when things were anything but, and every day felt like a month. Emma continued to gaze at me with this optimistic smile on her face, as if she was holding on to the hope that perhaps I might solve all of our issues. Mom didn't do much better either, feigning calm while she was obviously anxious. Then, the outcomes were received. I didn't fit in. The relief that swept over me upon hearing those words is beyond words. It felt as though a tremendous weight had been removed from my chest, and I felt like I could breathe again, something I hadn't felt in weeks. It turned out that I wouldn't have to make that difficult decision after all. My comfort only lasted a couple of seconds, though, as I noticed Mom and Emma's faces were completely destroyed. Emma started weeping in the doctor's office and suddenly broke down. She made an effort to control her tears, but they wouldn't stop. Mom put her arms around daughter, and they both had a dejected expression. Seeing them in that state, knowing they had invested all of their hope in something that would never materialize, hurt. Seeing them disintegrate in such a way hurt my heart. But I also realized there was nothing more I could do. We took a silent drive home, and I tried to give them room for the following few days. I had the impression that I was treading carefully while attempting to prevent things from getting worse, and that there was nothing I could do to change the situation. Although they never held me responsible for not being a match, I always felt like I had let them down because of the sorrow in their eyes whenever they saw me. Dad died 7 months later. It came as no surprise. He had been in and out of the hospital, each stay leaving him weaker. Even yet, it seemed as though everything abruptly halted when the call arrived. There was this odd emptiness, even though I wasn't close to him. Like the last page of a novel that never really made sense had ended. Emma was the most affected. She retreated for some time, hardly coming out of her room. It was difficult to witness, particularly in light of her strong desire for a different conclusion. Mom did her best to be strong for us both, but I could see her breaking. They had placed so much hope in the possibility that we would be able to save him. And when that failed to materialize, it seemed as though all that optimism became a burden that we had to bear together. I made every effort to be Emma's support system. When she needed to talk, I listened, even if I wasn't very good at it. When she required alone, I sat by her. She gradually began to revert to her former self, but it took some time. Though the anguish never completely vanished, it did become less painful with time, much like an old bruise. I can see now that I made the proper choice. Despite the fact that seeing what it had done to them ached like crazy. Even if I had wanted to, I could not have given him my kidney. But completing the test demonstrated to them my effort. It demonstrated to them my willingness to assist where I could, and that was all I had to give. I cannot hold myself responsible for the outcome, nor can I hold them accountable. Emma, on the other hand, is presently doing well. She's grinning once again. Furthermore, it's not as forceful as it formerly was. Though we're all still finding out how to go ahead, it feels like we might be able to for the first time in a very long time.